because as a former NFL player, and we like to play forever. A lot of times we think that that's all we were put on this earth to do, with accolades and the like. And as you might know, many NFL players don't have a strong financial history or future, if you will, after they stop playing the game. I can recall when maybe my third or fourth year of being in business, a reporter from, I forget now, maybe Business Week or Financial Planning Magazine was interviewing me, and she insulted me, but she didn't know she insulted me, but I ended up taking it as a compliment. What she said essentially was, at the time I had become one of the top 10 percentile of money managers in the style of investing, that we do at Profit. And she kind of ended part of our interview by saying, well, obviously you are a much better money manager than you were a football player. And, after I kind of stopped from being taken aback, I think this was the first time that I really didn't look at myself as a football player, because I was, what do you mean? But then I thought about it, and I said, well, I was in a top 10 percentile of money managers. And I certainly wasn't in the top 10 players on my own football team, much less the other 30, I think, NFL teams, at that time. So she was, correct in saying that. So going all the way back to the introduction. So maybe fortunately I did, pull a hamstring muscle, and it did in my football career. But the good news is I had a backup plan, which I thought was my life's work to begin with, which was taking my understanding of the way companies work and operate and what you see over and over again in successful corporations, and then went about investing in that style, and we've done that for the past 10 years, and that's where our growth has come from. But what I like to do, I don't like to lecture, certainly, and I know a lot of times we're looking for that magic bullet when we are running a business or have a business, or we're looking for finance. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of Profit with respect to that very nature, and kind of how we went about funding Profit Investment Management, and maybe leave you with some nuggets as you look around to take into your own businesses. The first thing I'd like to start with is saying we bootstrapped our business. As many entrepreneurs know, when you're starting out, the best source of capital is your own. And usually, you don't have enough all on your own to get to the levels that you want to get to. So the next best thing is friends and family, right? And you hear all kinds of disaster stories about, friends and families investing and the like. But I think what I'd like to point you to, more importantly than even using your own capital or using friends and family capital, at Profit, we never spent any money or bought anything that we couldn't afford. And what that meant is I didn't start out with a plan and said it was going to take me $1 million to grow my business, $500,000 to grow my business. I started with whatever we had, in the bank. We didn't have a lot of capital equipment, to invest in. And so essentially, we didn't have a Bloomberg, in my office, which is what, the tool that I use now to make investment decisions. So I went to the library and read the value line, right? A lot less expensive, so I needed a lot, less money. And I also would always, say, one of the things I learned early on is when you're setting out to start a business plan, a strategic business plan, right? And you're coached or counseled to look at the best case scenario, right? And when you start looking for outside financing, you look at different cases, base case, you look at what you consider worst case, and to try to figure out what the actual risk is you're putting out in front of your potential investor for the assets that they are investing in. In almost 100% of the cases, that downside risk is underestimated by at least a factor of 2. So in a lot of cases, the worst case that you put down in your business plan or your strategic plan ends up being the best case. And so I like to tell folks when they're structuring business plans or looking at how much money they're going to need is absolutely model, your best case. I don't care what your business is, right? You hear that adage all the time. Business can't grow without capital. That's what fuels the growth. But you also want a plan B or a backup plan, whether or not you share that with your potential funders of the what-if scenario if you can't, get that capital. If you can't do it without getting a certain amount of capital, maybe you should reconsider whether or not the sweat equity and effort you're putting in at the outset is enough to get you going. I mean, entrepreneurs by our very nature, we're accustomed to running through walls. We're accustomed to doing things that people will tell us can't be done. And so I believe, as everyone believes, if you have a dream and a vision, to go forward with it. But I also believe that you need to pay attention to all information that's out in front of you. And sometimes, if you're being told no, 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 if you can't refine it to get to a yes, or you can't refine it to go forward without getting to a yes, maybe you need to take that into consideration of whether or not this is an opportune time to do that business. As I was flying in this morning, and I'm sure if anyone who's taking a flight, you always get that pre-flight safety introduction on the plane. And they always show you where the exits are, right? And of course, when I first started out, one of my early partners said, in this type of talk, he always knew where the exit was when he started his business. I got upset with him. I was like, why are you telling people, that? Don't you, believe in, what you're doing and what we're doing? And he said to me, I never intended to use the exit, but I need to know how to get out of this if, in fact, it didn't work. And so in using that parallel of that pre-flight briefing, how many of you, and you can raise your hands if you want to, really want to figure out that you have to use that emergency exit? Even though every time you get on a plane, they tell you to know where it is. So even if you're looking for financing, to grow your business, or you're looking for trying to grow to that next level, it's always wise to know what the end game might be if it's not the optimum end game that you envisioned when you started, out on your business. Now, obviously, you know all the small business sources of funding and financing and the like, so that's not really, what I wanted to discuss. I want to talk about some of the softer side of what goes into sort of making some of those financing decisions or going forward with the business or growing the business. And we never went looking, for money. I will say one thing that would have helped Profit, along the way, and so we tend to look at this a little bit more, is engaging in partnerships with people or entities that have resources that we want and could use to grow our business. Now, a lot of times we don't do that because we are concerned about the valuation of our small business or what we're giving up. You're coached constantly to, preserve, your equity. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of times, the preservation that you're doing around that equity is worth a lot less than you're giving it credence to. That old adage of, maybe the sum of the parts, the two together, is worth more than your individual whole. So don't get lost in not trying to combine entities or finding partners, not all the way out to the barter system, even though if that's where you are, anything you have to do to get financing or the capital to continue along the path in your business can be useful. But certainly, trying to find partnerships or people in the industry might need a resource that you have that might be able to bring your product to market a lot more efficiently and effectively and a lot less cost and a lot less risk than you can. It might be wise to consider maybe some of those combinations. And it's just that I found that even, I didn't know the financial, business, and a lot of our firms don't look at combinations for a variety of reasons. I think a lot of times ego, but I will tell you the most successful firms in the industry generally have had a large corporate partner or someone to help them get through the initial phases of that business, to help with introductions, to help with the planning of the business, and also probably to make you more credit worthy or more of a good bet for a funding source to give you capital, for your business. And then the next thing I'd just like to point out, my interest was in opening for questions, because I think that I'm able to basically talk about what you want to talk about, if I know what you'd like to talk about with respect to questions, is I got to look at football occasionally, because that's part of my history. And being here in Jacksonville, I was looking last week at one of the old Hard Knocks series over the holiday, and Baltimore Ravens were on the 2001 season, right after I guess they had won the Super Bowl, and Jack Del Rio was the linebacker coach, and Ernest Biner was on that staff, and they both coached here in Jacksonville last season. But I also began, thinking, of course, the Jaguars, just sold, and they sold for $760 million. Well, Mr. Weaver bought the Jaguars as a new franchise for what, $140 million? So you think about when he was planning out that business, right? When he was looking at who his coach was going to be, whether or not he was going to get new stadium financing, whether or not he was going to finance the team, and worry became whether or not the team was going to stay in Jacksonville, and all the things you've read about, in the paper, right? On and on. Do you think it was ever part of his plan, or did he ever think, back when he got that franchise, that he was going to sell it for $760 million? So sometimes the most successful thing that happens in the business has very little to do with what you start out with, what your product is, or what you're doing, the things you worry about on a day-by-day basis, right? And so I think that when you are looking at trying to grow your business, or you're looking and beating down those doors, or you're looking for any of the small business programs that for whatever reason they won't return your call, or all of those things, right? I certainly would impel you to continue on forward. But I think the most important takeaway I wanted to present you with is to make certain you knew where the exit was, to make certain that you basically had a plan B that was probably a lot less capital intensive than your optimum plan. And then to basically, when you're creating your budgets in your business, to operate on that lower plan B plan. And then be surprised, by the success. It takes away a bit of the stress when you're doing it. When things go wrong, as invariably they will, you have a little bit of a cushion. And most importantly, continue to ask, for help within the industry. Suppliers are a great source of funding and financing, especially for products that you need.